Moshi Moshi, all of you are in my new room now. This is how it currently looks. It's going to look a lot better soon, I promise. But it explains my absence, so if you don't know, Natasha and I have finally moved in together. We've moved house, which is why I haven't been uploading or streaming as much, because my internet's kind of not as good out here. But that doesn't mean anything. I'm still going to be somewhat consistently uploading videos and hopefully consistently doing Twitch still as soon as everything gets sorted out, so thank you for bearing with me. But today we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about one of the people that I idolized when I was a child. Now, I know most people idolized Michael Jordan or Eminem, but when the only thing you wanted to be was the baddest man that walked the face of this earth, our story is going to start in Wallachia, Romania, between 1428 and 1431. During this time, we're going to see the birth of the third member of the House of Draculeshti, the second son of Vlad II Dracul. Vlad the Third. Really not good at naming shit. But if that's starting to sound super familiar, you are probably very familiar with one Irish Gothic writer, Bram Stoker. In Wallachia saw the rise of the Order of the Dragon. Now, this would have been roughly what their symbol would look like. A little bit enhanced and a little bit cooler looking. But they were pretty much there just to halt the advances of the Ottomans into the European nation at the time. Vlad II took seat when his brother, who you've never heard of, Alex... Yeah, his brother's name was Alex. Yeah. Died. If nothing else, now you know that. Now, even though he had the Order of the Dragon, roughly the story tells of a meeting between VS and the Voivode of Transylvania, John Hunyadi, which caused an uproar in the Ottoman Empire. So, the Ottoman Sultan, Murad II, ordered Vlad Sr. to come to Gallipoli to prove his loyalty to him. And as all good tales go, Vlad and his two sons were imprisoned. Now it just so happens that the Sultans kept the two sons, but ended up freeing VS, giving the boys education, combat ability, and even a place to live. Now the place had high walls, bars and everything, it had shitty food, it kinda sounded like my high school. Because it was a fucking prison. But this just fueled the young Vlad III. This just gave him that push that he needed. The Ottoman army ended up marching and defeating Hyundis's army in the Battle of Kosovo, 17th to 18th October 1448. Remember that time period? It's going to come back very soon. John's army, and I'm going to call him John from now on because his last name's fucking hell to pronounce on the fly, I've already messed it up like 4 times. His deputy at the time, Nicholas, I'm going to butcher it, I'm just going to fucking keep moving like I didn't, urged the young Vlad to come meet him in Transylvania. But Vlad ended up refusing, seeing this as his time to just kind of dip out. After it all went down, Vlad settled in Edirne, under the reign of the Ottomans. Not long after that, though, he once again had to move and settle in Moldavia, where his possible uncle, maybe even brother-in-law? Yeah, I swear this story could take place in Alabama. Bogdan II had just taken throne to support John in 1449. Skip over all that boring shit because that fucker ended up getting murked as well by Peter in 1451. Yeah. Peter the Third Aaron. These fucking names go from one extreme to another, I am not joking. And son Stefan then fled to Transylvania, looking for assistance from John with Vlad. However, by then, John Hunyadi made a truce with the Ottomans that would last about 3 years, starting off on November the 20th, 1451. Some running around, some wars happened, it's the fucking 1400s. There is nothing to do but go to war at this time, understand? Now that we kind of have everything led up to the point of where you kind of understand a bit of his backstory and why he's so messed up and hates the Turks so much, we can get on to the cool shit. The shit that makes me believe this is one of the coolest motherfuckers to ever walk the earth. So, during the period of 1448, he did some of the most notable things. Horrible, terrible things. but things that we're still talking about 600 years later. You think Kesha's gonna be around fucking 2600? Nah. He was famous for impalement. When the battle had ended and his team fled, the opponents were left with such a disgusting, grim scene of seeing nothing but the people that they'd become friends with, that they have gone to war with, piked from literally their bottom to their top, completely skewered along the battlefield. That is just one of the many cool things that this guy did. Absolutely horrible, but absolutely awesome if you ask me. Now, this man loved impalement. Loved it to the point there are stories and theories that he used to go through and blunten his weapons as to not actually kill you upon impact. They would simply concuss or just injure you enough that when he piked you, you were still living. And if done with enough technique, there are survival stories of people lasting between seconds to minutes to hours to days. There are people who would have died from dehydration or heat stroke before ever being taken by the impalement. That is what makes this man so awesome. He had this craft, he had this ideology, this thing that he was going to give to the world and produce such a psychological fear over the battlefield that it then actually started to rain back on his own people. His own townspeople in a town with 60,000 poor, suffering people that couldn't afford food or just your basic luxuries of living, dared not to even go against his will. There are stories of him placing a pure golden cup in town square, and the rules were anybody may drink from it, may play with it, may touch it, may do whatever they want to it, but it did not leave the square. That was it. They were the rules. You could do whatever you wanted to it, but it did not leave the square. And during his whole reign, however many years he reigned up until his death, it was never attempted, it was never thought of, and it was never even misplaced. No one would go against it out of fear of what he'd do to you. Because even to his enemies, if he wasn't directly attacking them, he had ways to mess you up that you didn't even realize were happening. Which is a part that nobody talks about for Vlad that I'm incredibly impressed by, because it's one of the most tactical, thought out things you can do at war. Which, for lack of a better term, is chemical warfare. But not like you and I know with Agent Orange and other types of gases. He did it an OG way. More notably on the things that he would do was he was more of a hit and run kind of guy, as he didn't have a whole lot of people. He only lived in a city of about 60,000. That includes men, women, children, and anything in between at that point, whether it be injured or disabled. So he didn't actually have a whole lot of army. But what he could do was hit and run tactics, essentially get in there, get some numbers up, get out. Whittle down the enemy numbers until they're roughly about the same as yours, and then you can attack. Then your psychology will set in. But one of the other ways he used to do it that no one ever speaks about was he would find people in his town with the most notable diseases being leprosy and the fucking bubonic plague at the time, and send those people in to mingle with his enemies. He would literally, in some of the first ever recorded evidence of chemical warfare, give people contractable illnesses before they went to war. No one speaks about this. But this man was a fucking prophet from his times. This man did something that nobody else thought of. Back then, it was just swords and shields the whole way, bows and arrows. But this man has one of the recorded first ever attacks with chemical warfare. Whether it be biochemical or not, it's still one of the first recorded, which is utterly insane. This man is fucking crazy. And it worked. It worked. His enemies used to actually contract and start to catch leprosy and the bubonic plague, which is a horrible thing to fucking catch. But, in light of all this, in this very short video, we're actually going to tally up roughly what this man conquered. Yeah, if we're looking at it statistic-wise, he killed roughly 80,000 people during his 45-year span of living. Now, if we're looking at it like a tally like that, that that leaves us with a score of pretty much 1,777.77 people per year he was living. People who live in America. To give you an idea of how large that is, roughly in 2021, there was a census of how many people lived on the Roanoke Islands in Virginia. It was just slightly above the number of people he had an assisted hand in killing. Which, if that doesn't put him on your fucking list of some of the greatest warriors of all time, I don't know what will. Because that alone, in and of itself, 80,000 people, a whole island dead because of this man. Well, that earned him a place in the history books and in my heart. Because I genuinely love this guy. But, for the most part, he's just one of a few thousand. He's likely one of the ones you've heard of. If you haven't, now you know. Let me know what you think down below. And be good people. Love yous. Also, for any of us wondering who I have next in mind, because I have a list chamber in my head, we're heading all the way over from Transylvania to Scotland, and if you were a fan of the movies in roughly the 1990s, well, you probably know who I'm talking about next. Be good people.